On Into the Mindset, we know a healthy body starts with a healthy environment. But mold, excess moisture, and foundation settling in your crawl space can silently harm your lungs and your home. Squeaky floors and cracking walls, that's a red flag. Advanced Crawl Space Solutions offers encapsulations that can boost energy savings by up to 20%. Plus, vapor barriers and rot repair to protect your air, your home, and your health. A healthy crawl space means a healthier you. Click the link below to get a free quote today. And don't forget to type in Into the Mindset to get 5% off. On Into the Mindset, we are all about protecting what matters most. And that includes your safety and your time. Fall is just around the corner, and with it comes leaves, clogged gutters, and dangerous ladder climbs. Freedom Gutter Covers gives you a lifetime no-clog guarantee, so you'll never have to risk a fall or clean your gutters again. Let us install your covers today so you can focus less on chores and more on faith, family, and freedom to be a healthier you. Click the link below to get a free quote today. And don't forget, type in Into the Mindset to get 5% off. Welcome to Limitless Living Into the Mindset, the podcast that dives into the heart of growth, grit, and what it really means to keep moving forward. Andy, I have been really excited about this one since I first invited you. We've kind of it's been a cool ride for our friendship since the beginning. Kind of a cool story. We met at a turkey trot 5K.
First one.
Yeah, first one.
My first one.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Your first one. And, well, I'll kind of let you get into that story a little bit because whenever I tell it, it makes me look pretty cool. So I'll kind of let you talk about it more.
Embellish.
But anyways, from that point, getting into your church and really becoming a big part of your church and continuing to grow with that. And I don't know, it's just, we've really found our church family with you guys. And I'll get into a little bit more of it later, but for somebody who grew up in the church that kind of got away from the church, had kind of a bad taste in my mouth, it has been really refreshing to be a part of your church and be a part of that community again. So really excited to have you on the podcast and just to kind of get into the conversation with you a little bit. So welcome.
Let's do it. Thank you. Looking forward to it.
So why don't we start off with the story of how you and I kind of met? I'll let you kind of take the reins on that. No pun intended.
So we had Thanksgiving with my family and they were all down, and my sister messaged me one night, was like, "Hey, you and Ashley, my wife, want to run a 5K. And I was like, sure. And it benefits the boys' baseball team. So I thought, well, if anything, I'll go out there and, give $25 to the baseball team and I'll go run, and then I'll go gorge myself on food the rest of the day. I'm not a runner. So let's just establish that right now. I've never run a 5K. I run exactly one a year.
That makes you a runner.
On average for the last 2 years. This year, I don't know, but show up and I'm like, one of these dudes here is a runner. Like, I just know it. So I'm looking around. I'm like, who can I try to pace off of? And
He's out there stretching, taking this serious.
Stretching. Look like they've already had a warm-up run in. Yeah. And I'm like, and I see Colin, and I don't know, like being an athlete, like you can tell like certain builds, like runners are built a certain way, footballers are built a certain way, baseball players even to a certain extent. So everybody's kind of, and I was like, that dude's a runner. And I thought, all I'm going to do is I'm just going to try to keep up with him for as long as I can. Cause I really had no expectation. Like I was like, could I run a sub 30? Maybe, I don't know. And so I was like, we'll just find out. But I said, that dude looks like a runner. So I just take off behind him and like, I'm trying to stay on his heels. And so I do until we kind of run around this corner and it goes downhill. And I'm like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good. And then it goes uphill. And all of a sudden, what was heels begins to, like, the distance starts really spreading out. Before long, like, I can't even see him, right? So we turn around, and he randomly just comes up, and we start talking. I was like, well, I don't run, but you looked like one. And so we're talking. And like, I kind of felt kind of good about myself, having kept up with a runner for the first mile. Like, I was kind of like, yeah, I'm like feeling pretty good about this. And then he drops on me, yeah, I just had kidney surgery like 2 weeks ago. That's my first run back. And I'm like, well, gosh,
puts it in perspective for
I
you.
was like, I got nothing. So anyway, we started talking
about that.
Yeah. And so,
I like to humble people.
well, it was a nice dose of, I mean, just the fact that I was wheezing when I came across the finish line of a 5K, but it was just a whole interesting. And then we kind of caught up afterwards and started making some connections. Like, his kids had, my wife works for the school district. And so there was that connection. And it's like, man, you really look familiar. And so he talking about Matt, and I'm like, well, that's where some of the family stuff came from. And then, we just start from there. Just we started talking about church stuff, and he's like, we've been thinking about coming and trying you guys out. And, that was, almost 3 years ago.
That's what I was going to ask. I didn't know how long it had been.
It was
almost 3 years.
It was almost 3 years ago. Because this year will be the third turkey trot that we'll do together. I guess if you guys are gonna, do it again this year. It was the first of many times that your wife Ashley came over to you while we were talking and was like, "We need to go.
Time to go.
It's time to go."
Well, does that happen a lot?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like this other day we go to dinner or we go to lunch after church, and like her and my mom are sitting there with my daughter. My son had went home with some friends, and they're like, I sit down, and of course, like half the church is there, right? So there's these people, and then I got a buddy sitting over here, and I go say hi to him, and then there's a kid from my bus that's sitting over here, and I'm just kind of waving and saying hi, and just and Ashley's like, we were sitting here trying to count how many people you'd go say hi to before you come and sit down.
It became a family game.
Yeah, now it's a game. So it's like, how long are we going to be here while Dad finishes? Chit chatting, but when it's home and you've been here for, I mean, we're transplants. Like we didn't grow up in Lebanon we didn't grow up in Lebanon. But like, this is as much as home has been, for my kids were born, they were born in Osage Beach, but we were living here. And so, you try to invest in the community, you try to get to know people. And before long, you go to Walmart and you see 4 or 5 people and go to ball games and everything else. And, I don't know, it just makes you feel good when you go someplace and folks and you can say hi and you remember their names and, hopefully they remember yours and don't look at you like, I know you from somewhere, but we're not at the right place, and so it's good. Like we enjoy it and, we love being at the church, love being in the community, love having kids that are active in the district and, all the things that come along with the busyness of, sports and activities and everything else. But
So let's kind of get into you guys. You didn't grow up here. You guys are transplants here. So how is that process? Where did you, I know you guys came here, pastor of our church, all of that.
I actually don't know the backstory. So
what's kind of the backstory of that?
So I grew up in Farmington. I say that we bounced around a lot as kids. About I would say probably 2 to 3 years, Dad would get a promotion or Dad would get a job that kind of took him up the corporate ladder. And so I was born in Oklahoma. We bounced around. I started school in Camdenton, actually. We moved to Joplin for a few years, but then finally when we wound up in Farmington, Missouri, which is just about an hour south of St. Louis, I finally, that we moved there the summer before I started 5th grade. And then up until about 15, 16 years ago, when my mom and dad divorced, my dad moved to Arkansas. My mom lived there until like 3 years ago. So for mom, that was as close to home as, time wise, that she'd ever had. And so anyway, I graduated from high school, went to college in the metro east of St. Louis. So kind of the Belleville, O'Fallon area. And while I was there, it's funny because I knew probably at 15 or 16 years old, God was calling me to preach, or pastor, whatever the, term you want to use. And so I actually remember going to an altar and praying in my home church. And I was like, Lord, I'll do anything you want me to do. Just don't make me a preacher. Like I was terrified of it. And it wasn't just the thought of the public speaking, which terrified me. And still to a certain extent does. I'm sweating now. But it's one of those things where I knew I wasn't sure what it was going to entail. And I kind of had some aspirations. I wanted to either go into business like my dad was, or I wanted to teach and coach. Like, there's the typical, 16, 18, you're feeling your way through life and trying to figure out what you want to do for the rest of it. And
what was that feeling like? What sparked that, knowing that there was some calling there?
You know, it's really weird because I would sit there in church and my pastor, like I would have I don't want to call it like vision, but I could picture myself. I think that'd be an accurate way of putting it. I have these moments where I would picture myself and I would be in that pulpit preaching. And not be like, I wonder what it would be like. Like there wasn't any kind of sense of, and I had a good relationship with him, but it wasn't anything like, you know, in a sense, it wasn't like one of those jobs like I was aspiring to as a young kid.
You just saw it as if it were happening.
I just had I just kind of had these moments where like, I don't know if we use them, taking the dust off, blowing the dust off your imagination and you're letting your mind kind of run, but you're just thinking. And so that's, I think, really where it kind of started. And then I'd gone to college on a football scholarship, and I really kind of had goals. Like I wanted to be this All-American. I wanted to, really succeed on the football field, and I wanted to succeed in the classroom. So you kind of have these dreams, and never really got hurt in high school. We're up there doing testing on the first day, and I pull a hamstring. Like I felt like at that moment, like all that stuff, kind of what I'd really built my identity on, kind of piece by piece was I look back on it now, and piece by piece, it was just God stripping stuff away. Like you think you're this, but I've got other plans. Mm-hmm. And I didn't see it at the time. And so that was kind of the first thing. And then I felt like I was kind of buried on the depth chart. And it wasn't like, looking back on it, there were kids that were just better athletes than me. And that's just the truth, that's just the truth. But emotionally, like, that's what I'm feeling like, man, I really got hung up with this injury. And then some other things just kind of felt like they were falling apart. And I remember just feeling lost. Like, here I am, this freshman in college. I'd never really been away from home except for maybe like, a week at grandparents' house, but we were close with our grandparents. And so I didn't feel anything. And man, so like there's an identity thing. Like I'm struggling with emotions that I'd never really had to struggle with before. And I just remember feeling lost. And it was funny because I really wasn't living for the Lord in high school. Like it was more like my parents went to church. They wanted us to go to church. I knew it made my parents happy that I went to church and wanted to go to church. And so I served and did the youth group and was at church on Sunday mornings and Sunday nights and Wednesday nights. But like my faith had never really it really wasn't mine. I knew enough, and I'm thankful for parents that really put a good foundation that when life got hard, I had that at least foundation to kind of fall back on that really kind of girded me up in ways that I'm aware of now, but I wasn't so aware of when I was a kid. But I went to that school because I just felt like that's where God wanted me to go. Now, I can't explain that because I really wasn't living for him. But lo and behold, like there were two other guys on the football team that had both answered the call to ministry before we even get there. And so we're in their weight room. It's off-season conditioning. Our season's over. It's somewhere almost to spring break of my freshman year of college. And I was going back home for spring. We're in the gym. We're just getting our daily workout in. And I remember just sliding over to Noah. And I was like, man, how did you know? How did you know? Like when you said yes to the Lord, like, how did you know? What did that look like? And he said, if I could tell you, I would, but he said, you just kind of know. But it's funny because it was all, everything, like God used a vehicle of football. I wasn't living for the Lord. The third, the guy, one of the backup quarterbacks was the one that I was on my way to a trig class. Like, I'll never forget this. I was on my way to a trig class on a Thursday. And he's like, hey, Rains, how are you? And I'm like, I'm good. And I wasn't. Like, this was in the midst of all the emotional, like, and he's like, and then I'll never forget, like, his name was Mark Sigma. I'll never forget Mark just stopped. And he turned around and he just said to me, are you?
Yeah.
And I have no clue what happened after that. Like, I remember going to trig class and not remembering anything from trig class. Like, all I could think about was like, are you? Like, and it's almost like you're just kind of going through the motions of stuff, right? You're just trying to make things. Life's hard. At 18, 19, you know, you don't really, you know, you're struggling to handle the emotional load that now you have because you're kind of on your own. You're kind of making decisions on your own. You only have your parents to fall back on. So all this is happening like within a span of about a month, right?
Yeah.
And that was on a Thursday. The next Tuesday, one of the other guys on the team, he was an offensive lineman, Josh Jones. He's like, hey, you know, we got FCA. I'm speaking. Would you want to come? And dude, I don't have any idea what Josh spoke about that night. I don't. I remember simultaneously, and I told someone this yesterday, I remember simultaneously feeling the loneliest I've ever felt in my life, but also the most seen that I've ever felt in my life. And I can't explain. I knew some of the football guys were in there, some of the other athletes in there, but like it was almost as if it was me and Josh sitting in that room, and there wasn't 50 other athletes in there for this, you know, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I don't know what he said. I just remember at the end of it, I just broke. And all the sadness and all the struggle and all the, I just said, Lord, I just can't do it. I can't do it. And so it was a couple weeks after that, I was, you know, I saw Noah Oldham. I saw him. We were in the weight room. Wasn't very many of us at this particular time of the day. And we just, I just had a conversation with him, like, man, I know you've, you know, answered God, you know, God's call to preach, to ministry. I was like, what'd that look like? How'd you know for sure? And he's like, and that's when if I knew, I'd tell you, you just kind of know. And so I remember going home around spring break. And it was funny because my dad at the time had just answered the call to preach. And like, I can remember my mom, where I was sitting in the living room, I remember my mom going, one of the men in my life has answered the call, and now I'm just waiting on the other one. And she looks over at me, and I'm like,
that's convicting.
Mom. And
Mama Bear called you out.
But it was kind of one of those moments where I was like, okay. And then I can remember the Sunday that, you know, you're asking, like, how do you kind of, like, for me, you know, it was one of those things like, our church gave us Oswald Chambers, My Utmost for His Highest. And I remember the Sunday that my pastor was going to have me come up and let me announce it to the church. Like, the passage excerpt was like, preach the word. That was it.
That's pretty
and
clear
I was
there.
like, and even like that night, you know, earlier we were talking before we started this, like the what it's like Saturday night before Sunday.
Yeah.
And I remember just being up all night, like having doubts, like, is it? And I get up that next morning before church and I open that thing up and it's like, preach the word. And I'm like,
seals the deal.
Okay.
Yeah. How many times do I have to be smacked in the face before?
Well, and I think it's important too, like just from another aspect of it, like, I'm not gonna lie, like there's been times I've wanted to quit.
Yeah.
Because things are hard. Like life is hard. But it's that moment that I always go back to. Like that moment was a moment of like confirmation, a moment of conviction. And so like, even when I want to, I'm like, but this is what God's called me to do. This is, you know, what He's, I don't know, created me to do. Even though I'm not always as good at it as I would like to be. I think there's very much like, there's a conviction that, you know, came from like that moment. And then there's been the confirmations over the years, but I still look back and I'm like, nope, this is what.
Yeah. I think it always boils down to like where you started, when you started. Craig Rochelle, we were talking about him earlier, and he said something. I mean, I'm sure he said it many times, but I heard it in a particular sermon when I was needing to hear it. He said, when you want to quit, remember why you started. And so just that rewind button all the way back to how you felt that sealed the deal, that Oswald Chambers moment of like, no, I've got to do this. I have to do this. So whatever made you feel like you had to do that, whatever the Spirit was kind of putting into your stream of thought and where you were at that time in your life, that's the stuff that you've got to get back to, because there's plenty of reasons to quit. There's that one main reason that you got to start. So that's cool.
So what, in college, all that happened, how did you get to Lebanon?
I remember answering the call to preach, and then I thought this was going into like my sophomore. This was in late freshman year. Let's see what happened after that. Went back to school for my sophomore year. Came home that summer, and thought to myself, you know, I probably ought to go to like Bible college or something, like go and get like a ministry degree. But like the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I just don't know that that's. And so I wound up going back and getting a degree in education. And about the time I was getting ready to graduate, the pastor we had when we lived in Joplin had called my dad. My dad at the time was serving as a youth pastor, and asked Dad if Dad would be interested. And he said no, but he's like, my son just answered the call to preach. And they were like, he's like, well, would he want to come down and do an internship? And so I was like, well, I need a summer job. And my football career was over. So I didn't have to worry about, is there a gym available? Got to get my off-season conditioning in. It was like, nope, I could go. And so they had a few people in the church that actually put some furniture in a parsonage. And I had a twin bed that someone donated. And I went down and spent the summer down there. And so I have to interject this story because I think it's all kind of part of it. So the first week I'm down there, we have a denominational meeting of our state, like Missouri. And so I've never been there. I walk in the first day, and like, ironically enough, the next youngest guy there is actually the guy that was pastoring the church I'm at now.
Oh, wow.
20 years ago. And I don't know, Joe's probably 10, 15 years older than I am. I'm not for sure, but I did notice the other young person there was this pretty little redhead working the registration table. And I don't know anybody, right? I don't have any friends down there. I knew the pastor of the church I was at. This is in Thayer, Missouri. He had left Joplin and went to Thayer. And I was like, oh. And so I start asking questions. Long story. That's for another time, but we wind up having, lunch together. And I think literally spent every day at some point that summer together. We met in June. I proposed in September, and we were married the next July. So that was all kind of part of it. And so, but no, they
this is your wife, Ashley, right?
This is my wife, Ashley. Yeah.
Just want to clarify that for everybody.
At what point in the devotional did you open it up and it said, "Marry Ashley"?
Yeah.
It's funny because I had talked to her the whole time. I'm like, hey, I'm only here for the summer. I'm not in anything serious. Like, we really weren't like boyfriend, girlfriend. Like, we joke about this now because next year, 2026 is 20 years married. And so like, we kind of joke about it now. Like, we did not know each other in June, and I proposed 3 months later, and we were married like maybe like 12 and a half months later. If somebody were to come to me now and say, hey, pastor, I met this girl and like, we want to get married, I would be like, let's pump the brakes.
How does that line up with the marriage
but
counseling?
Like in the moment, right? Like in the moment.
Counseling.
And so like, I just knew and it was funny because I wasn't planning on really, I knew I wanted to marry her, but I wasn't planning on proposing. And so like, I'm driving down, it's her birthday weekend. I'm driving down and I'm like, I'm going to stop by the mall and I'm going to buy her a birthday present as I'm going down. Walk into the jewelry store, and we'd never even looked at rings. We hadn't talked about rings, and I'm like, I like that one. And I bought it, and I took it down there, and I remember sitting down with her dad and being like, hey, it was our mom and her dad, and I said, man, I love your daughter. I'd like to ask her to marry me, but I want your blessing. Like, I want you guys to be good with this. And I'll never forget, her mom's like, well, why don't you do it tonight? And I'm like, it's her birthday. That's like the cheesiest thing ever. And she goes, do it. And I'm like, what?
I think mom had a little bit of insight.
Yeah. And so I think mom knew something before either of us really did. But it's funny because it was one of those deals where like, we just need to be friends. We just need to be friends. But I'm driving, I'm in like just outside of St. Louis, and I'm driving back to West Plains, as often as I can when I don't have, I was doing some grad assistant coaching stuff, and I'm driving back and forth, and I'm student teaching, and I'm doing all this stuff. And like on a whim, like I swing by, and like I call my parents on the way down, and I'm like, hey, I bought a ring. At some point I'm going to propose, and I didn't even talk to my mom and dad about it. Like, it was just kind of one of those crazy things. But anyway, we wind up, long story short, the church I interned at wanted to bring me back. And so I said, well, I really want to get my degree. I'd changed my major a couple of times, and so I was about a semester behind. So I said, I've got to go back. I need to get my student teaching done, and I need to take another class. So I went back, the very end of 2005. I graduated in December of 2005, started officially in 2006. About 2 years into that, our mission director for our state was at church. He said, hey, you ever get a wild hair and want to plant a church? He said, give me a call. I'm like, oh, buddy, I'm not ready for that. But I do remember, man, I had a great pastor at that church, very grandfatherly, one of those guys, like the sage type men that they lived life and they just loved people and they wanted to teach people. And so he did so much for me. And I'll never forget, he sat me down in his office. He called me in there one day and he goes, "Hey," now he was much more kind and gentle than this, but my mind, it was like, "Hey, you're really not cut out for youth ministry. You really need to be pastoring a church."
Man, I wish somebody had told me that.
And so, and honestly, like probably leading up to that, like 6 months, I probably knew, I was just like, well, he's going to retire someday. Give me a few more years that I can learn. And then maybe I'll be ready to just kind of step into this church. Cause it was a great church. I love being part of that community, that church. But I knew at that conversation, like you look back and it's just that confirmation, like what you needed and you didn't know you needed it. But when he said it, I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I went back and I called Frank, our missions director. And I said, "Hey, I'm not really interested in planting a church, but I said, I am interested in pastoring." And I said, "I want to go somewhere I want to be myself." I wasn't a suit and tie guy. I was like, I just want to go somewhere where I can be me. And that's going to be good. Like, it's going to be okay.
I had this place in Lebanon, Missouri.
You know, it's funny. He was attending the Lebanon church and he's like, "I got one." And I'm like, "This is way too fast," right? And you're like, in your head, you're like, "This is how this conversation was going." Like, "Well, let me think about it a few weeks and I'll call you back." He's like, "No,
Just
I got one."
Quick reminder of how God works.
How he works. And I'm like, and it's funny because the pastor left, right? So he's like, "We got an opening at Lebanon." And I'm like, "No,
Definitely not.
Not that place.
And he goes, "Listen, man." He goes, "Listen." He said, "Come up and be our guest. You can spend the night. We'll put you up. Just come and spend the weekend." This is Labor Day weekend of 2009. And so I come up and we had only planned on staying till after church, eating lunch, and then we were going to go back home. And so one way or another, the guy that was kind of filling in had to be gone. And I wound up just coming up and they're like, "We need someone to preach. You want to just come up and preach?" And they're like, "No, it would be like, you're not committing to anything. Like, we just need someone here." So I talked to my pastor and he's like, "I think you should go do it." And so off we totter up here to Lebanon, Missouri. And like, I'll never forget, like as we were standing at the door, as people were leaving, and of course, if you weren't in the church at the time, like a lot of things have changed since, in the last 16 years, but we're there. And like Ashley and I are just looking at each other like, this is it. Like, this is it. And so we stayed an extra night. And I remember one of the leaders in the church at the time, he was having some people out at his house for a barbecue, and he goes, "Hey," and so when I'm leaving, like I've been at his house for 2 or 3 hours, and as I'm leaving, I'm like, "Hey, if you guys would be interested, like I'd be interested in having a conversation about maybe coming up here." That's in September. Then the interim guy decided he wanted to try. There were some other things that I had to kind of wait out, but finally in November, I got to come back. I wait through a couple of votes. Came back in November, and they're like, "We'd like to have you come and actually be a candidate." The church I was at was gracious. They're like, "Hey, we want you there. We want you to be there the beginning of the year." And so like the day after Christmas, I'm loading up what little possessions, Ashley and I had in the back of a borrowed trailer, and we're moving into Frank and Debbie's house because we don't have a house, right? Like we lived in a parsonage. So it's like, but on January 3rd of 2010, we started, and moving up here, just being like, "Man, this is the place. Like, I want this." You always hear, these guys, and there was been a few of them here in Lebanon that their entire career, right? One church,
right?
They were there 40, 50 years or whatever. And there was one of those here, just, I think, right up the road. And so like, that's kind of the mentality we had coming into it. Like, we don't want to be, I think the average tenure for a pastor is like 3 years. 2.5, 3.5 years, if that hasn't changed in the last, 5 years. But yeah, so this year's year 16, and in January we'll start year 17. And just seems weird. Should be that old, right? But yeah, that's how we wound up here.
So I want to go backtrack a little bit. You are kind of processing everything. You're feeling kind of lost and stuff, but you grew up in the church. Mm-hmm. You ultimately end up becoming a pastor. When your parents were kind of going through the divorce, how was that on you as someone who grew up in the church and kind of were within that world, as your parents kind of going through the divorce and your dad also being, a pastor in a church? what was that process like as they were going through that? And how did the church kind of treat that as well?
Oh gosh. I think a lot of times, I'll just say this. My flesh handled it one way. Looking back on it, I wish I would have handled it maybe a little bit more mature. I think at the time, like, you're devastated. Mm-hmm. My parents were married almost 30 years. It really wasn't something any of us saw. And I grew up in a home where, like, I had great parents.
Yeah.
They went to our activities. If we signed up and wanted to do something, like, we had the support at home to do what we wanted to do. So, like, for me, it was completely out of, matter of fact, we were on vacation when my dad called. And so it was kind of this, and I wasn't home. So I'm not sure exactly how things, at this point, like, I'm married, I'm on staff at a church. I was grateful for Richard Robinson, who was the pastor I was working for, the grandfather guy, because like he was kind of a steadying force and all that. And I tell people all the time, like, the importance of just having multi-generational relationships. And you could go back to a biblical basis for guys who made poor decisions because the only people they had around them were peers and not the sages, the wise, older folks to kind of have that, to have the wisdom that you can bounce off. I was fortunate that God, and I think in God's foreknowledge, he knew these things were going to happen, and had placed some really great people around me to help me weather the storm. But my flesh did not handle it well. I was mad for a long time. I think I went through some of the emotions that I feel like a lot of people go through whenever they're praying for something and maybe things don't happen, and you feel like your prayer goes unanswered. Mm-hmm. And then your next step is, because you're hurting, your next step is, well, I prayed and this didn't happen. And the logical step after that is, well, either God doesn't exist or God isn't who he says he is.
Right.
And then you're wrestling with that. And I think it goes back a lot to, like, at what point in your life as a believer, and I think this is true for all of us, at what point in your life as a believer did your faith become your own and not just an inherited faith?
Oh, man. Yeah.
And for me, like, I could look back and I could say, there was a season in college when I'm wrestling through identity, and I'm wrestling through, am I going to keep believing these things even though, like, all these wants that I had aren't coming to fruition? I'm not an All-American. I'm not even a starter. I'm a career backup that plays on special teams. And so there was that kind of crisis of faith. And I'm drawing a blank. Henry Blackaby talks about this in, like, the Experiencing God Bible study. If you haven't done it, it's a fantastic one. But he talks about there's always been this crisis of faith, this crisis of belief. And it was almost like I had another one.
Yeah.
And so you've kind of grown, but then something else happens in life, and now now you're in a different place, but you're answering the same questions over again. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, there were people around me that helped me frame that from a right perspective, where it was like, now we're having this conversation, but we're having it from a different angle. Like, sometimes bad things happen, and there's not an explanation. Does that change God's character? Does that change who God is? Like, he tells us, like, in this world, we're going to have trouble. Mm-hmm. We looked at a passage last night on our Wednesday night Bible study that was like, hey, in these last days, which is the last days began when Christ ascended back into heaven after the resurrection. Paul lived in the last days. We live in the last days. So you got this idea where you got in these last days, like, you're going to face times of difficulty. And even Jesus himself tells us, like, hey, life's going to be hard. The world's going to have troubles, but fear not, I've overcome the world. And so at that point, now I've got to go, okay, God is good and God is in control. I don't understand this, but it doesn't change who God is.
Right.
Now, I wish I could say, like, in a moment, like, that happened for me. Mm-hmm. The reality was, it was probably a year in the making, because I can remember it. I can remember the conversation. I can remember moving to Lebanon, and I can remember having some really difficult conversations. But then we have a national convention every year, and I was part of this big initiative where we were walking from, like, somewhere on the East Coast, and people walked every day for months to end in Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. And it was raising money for missions. I think all told, like it was over $1 million we were able to raise for missions through this walk. And I was the Missouri guy. So I organized from like when they crossed the river into Missouri every day for like 10 days, like I'm with them step by step. And I remember wanting to be at this service. And so I attend the national that year. It's in Oklahoma City, and I'm sitting there in there. And like, it's kind of a proud moment. Like I was a part of something much bigger than me. But man, I don't know what happened. But I was sitting, the music, they had some background music. The service hadn't even started. And like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, here I am getting ready to try to celebrate this. And there's a passage that comes to mind like, hey, if you've got something against your brother, go and take care of it before you bring your offering. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm sitting there just in this state of turmoil. And like, I don't even attend the service. I go back to my hotel room and I call my dad up and I'm like, I need you to forgive me. Like I've said some terrible things. I've felt some terrible things. And at that moment, like you start seeing these glimpses of like God's grace. And grace is really this really incredible word, because it's not just like, John doesn't deserve a gift, but I'm going to gift it to him anyway. Like that's a lot of times but grace really is you begin peeling it back. Like it's strength. It's
you have a gift for me?
Hope. I wish I should have brought gifts. I listened to a podcast where like everybody gets a gift and I'm like, I should have brought gifts.
Real quick, we do have to pause since we're talking about it was John's birthday yesterday. So happy birthday.
Happy birthday, John. I think
I was going to send you a Facebook message, but I don't like people that I'm close with. I don't like just sending the message. I actually like saying it face to face. So I'll see John tomorrow.
It might be a week after, but
I'll see John tomorrow. So I'll tell him happy birthday tomorrow.
Thank you.
But I'm doing it publicly so that it looks better.
It's on record.
For posterity.
Yeah, that's right.
So for me, like really looking back on it, it's one of those things. Like I think sometimes I've been kind of on. It sounds absolutely ridiculous when I say it. I've been on a suffering kick. And what I mean by that is our youth pastor. I gave him like the month of July to preach, and so he had missed. And it was kind of this comment in the midst of a sermon, and it was the word was in the text, but it was talking about suffering. Mm-hmm. And I was like, it just lodged, right? And so Timothy Keller wrote a book called Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering. And so I bought I had a credit in Audible, and I bought the book, and like I'm mowing my grass, right? And it's like I'm having this epiphany because I'm listening to what he's saying, and he's like, a lot of times he's talking, and he was making reference to a guy who he actually helped write the diagnostic manual for doctors. And he said, he's looking back on like this work that he participated in. And he said, we basically tried to diagnose life. He said, because a lot of life is just simply like some of the suffering we have to endure and growing through it. But he said, we wanted to label it as something. Now, I don't know anything about medicine. Okay. This is just me reading a book. But there was a part of that that kind of resonated. Mm-hmm. Like in life, life is hard. And there's a book called Do Hard Things. And sometimes life is hard and you just have to keep going. And looking back on it, like I'm listening to this, and I think some of that has been foundational in like helping me just, we talked about conviction and the calling and confirmation and the calling. I think too, it's just been a conviction. Like God is who he says he is, even if he doesn't always work like I want him to work.
Right.
He's still God. And it's easy to have the platitudes and quote the scripture and be like, his ways are higher than our ways. And yeah, like that's true. Do I really believe that? And if I do, how does that change the way that I'm going to respond to the trials and the difficulties that happen in my life? And how can those be used to glorify God? How does it change the way that now I'm beginning to see and watch how God's working in a different way in order for that goodness to be shown in some other area? And so, I look back on it, I think, yeah, I wish I would have had some of that maturity. Yes, I wish I would have had, even from a spiritual perspective, the maturity to be able to be like, okay, I just need to take a deep breath, but I didn't. And I later had to repent of that. Like I needed to seek forgiveness. I needed some reconciliation in that relationship. And but yeah, it does.
So that kind of takes me into, I very rarely actually write down questions that I want to ask people. But you're one that I actually had a few questions that I had to write down, just from articles that I've been reading or some of the things that you see trending and stuff like that, that directly involve the church, or are around it in some way. One of the words that has been going around, quite a bit lately is deconstruction. I don't know if you guys have heard anything about it, but the idea of it is, a lot of people are rethinking or walking away from the faith based off of some of the actions of the church or some of the actions of supposed Christian followers. And so the rethinking process, diving a little deeper into that, is they stripping back. They grew up in the church their whole life. They're adults now, and they see things that they're like, wait a minute. Or they're doing things themselves that they're like, hold on a second. Is this what I'm supposed to be doing? Is this what I'm supposed to be hearing? Is this the direction the church is supposed to be going? I don't know. So they strip back to kind of their beginning, their foundational faith. And so it's kind of that deconstruction of what they've done through their adult life. So my question is I think in a lot of ways, it's not being done correctly. And I think that's why some people are walking away from their faith overall, because of during that process, because they see things, they're like, wait, as I'm going back, I didn't like this, I didn't like this, I didn't like this, I didn't like this. And it's like, well, what's the point? And so we see Christian faith kind of falling off. You've kind of talked about it a few times. We're under attack, or we feel like we're under attack as Christian believers, or the church itself. So how can the church, pastors, members of the church, the community, help guide that process of that kind of deconstruction when somebody's going through that? What do you think is a good route for the church and that community to go down to say, hey, we see you and we understand what you're going through, and this is how we can kind of help with it, instead of just being like, oh, do it yourself kind of thing? Yeah.
Oh, this is like 5 podcasts now. And here's why. I think there's multiple levels to this, and I'm not the smartest guy. Let's say, so let's put all our cards on the table. I'm not an intellectual giant, at all. I think there's a couple of factors that play into this. I think some of it's culture itself. Mm-hmm. I think that needs to be stated before you dive into this other side of it, because what we often find, and this is true in my own life, so this isn't me like throwing stones or anything. I think what's often our natural tendency is like, I mess up, I want you to have grace for me or mm-hmm. toward me and mercy. But if you mess up, I have far more grace for myself than I have for other people.
It's not reciprocal.
Yeah. And so I think the struggle with that is that we have a tendency sometimes to see the brokenness we're talking about the church specifically right now. Yeah. So we see some of the brokenness, or maybe we learn of some of the brokenness, and instead of our initial response being grace, it's like, mm-hmm. that's right.
Gotcha.
I knew it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think some of that is like, let's be honest, some of that I think is the skepticism that's present in culture today. Because one day you can open up a news feed and it'll tell you, hey, if you walk 10,000 steps a day, your life expectancy increases by 7.269 years. That's totally made up, but you get what I'm
saying.
Sounds
right. Yeah.
But then the next week, a different expert is saying, oh, that number is not 10,000, it's 7,000, or you really don't need to walk, but if you do this, and it's like that everywhere, right? It's like every time we open up something, you get, so what it's done in this, and I'm not going to blame the 24-hour news cycle, but at some point there's only so much news, and you got to start kind of making
filter
news.
It out.
And what happens is now all of a sudden we've got this skepticism now so you've got this skepticism mixed with, listen, I'm far from a perfect guy. Far. I'm not even going to sit here and pretend that I have everything together.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that, and I'll acknowledge it.
Yeah.
Although it pains me sometimes, but it's the truth, right? So let's just be honest. So you've got flawed, sinful people doing their best. And I believe that. I believe there's a lot of men in this community, people in this community that are doing their best to lead God's church, and it's his, to the best of their abilities, knowing good and well, like at some point we're going to mess something up.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to get involved in it somehow, or I've got an idea. And when that happens, I think what the tendency has been, and again, I think this is just looking in general at church history. Okay. I think you had a generation of guys that grew up in a church. There's a story about a pastor that, would just harp on people not wearing shorts at church. Whoops. And then I wore them last night to Bible study, but it took me about 12 years to get over not wearing pants. but he would harp on it, like, don't wear shorts. I think don't wear shorts, period. Like, not just don't wear them to church, like, don't wear shorts. And then he just happened to be vacationing in the same place as one of his church members was vacationing. And guess what he had on? Yeah. He had on shorts, right? Well, it was different. Well, what was different about it? Well, I'm not around anybody.
You're around people.
Right.
And I think there was some of this where it was like, you had this idea where it was like, we know we're going to mess up, but let's act like we didn't. And I think that began to permeate the church, right? Like, we're going to say we're broken. We're not just going to say how we're broken. And then you have a generation coming up that's seeing this and it's obvious to them, right? And yet when they begin asking questions, their questions aren't being answered.
They get shut down.
They just, it's almost like, well, you don't need to worry about that. This is, and so, like, going back to your original question, like, how can we help navigate this? I had a conversation with a young man yesterday, grew up in an atheist, agnostic home. And he said, I've been in a series of events in his life. Again, let's talk about God's grace. He did not grow up in a Christian home, wanted nothing to do with the church, but he knew a Christian family and he had messed up in a big way. And it was grace from that family that is like, it made me realize there's something different about these people.
Yeah. Because
when everybody else would have reacted this way and probably should have, this family didn't respond in that way. And so he said, anyway, he's on this, I don't want to say a faith journey. I think that's kind of, but he's like, Andy, I've given my life to the Lord. He said, I'm watching this guy on Facebook, and it's one of these guys, I can't remember the guy's name. I've seen the reels of it though, where he's on college campuses and he's basically a Christian apologist, right? So these students are coming to him with these questions, and he goes, Andy, they're questions that I've had that I've just never asked. Mm-hmm. And so I think we have got to allow some room for people to ask questions, and us be okay with saying, I really don't know the answer to that.
I was just thinking that.
I think that's really where it begins. Like, where it's like, can we give it room to breathe? And someone say, well, my spirit was crushed when I prayed for this and it didn't happen. And I can go, I've been there.
Right.
Yeah.
I've been there. And just let it let it breathe. Mm-hmm. But I still think there's still a little bit of a tendency sometimes for us to not want to maybe let some of that, because we want to feel like we have the answer. I certainly do. Like, here I am supposed to be this spiritual leader of the church, and I got people asking me questions, and I'm like, I don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah. I think it was a long time ago, but you did a youth series where it was I don't know.
Yeah.
And it was basically talking about that we as leaders of, whether it's spiritual leaders in our home, youth leaders, pastors, whatever, we have to be comfortable in saying sometimes, I don't know, but let's figure it out together.
Yeah. Getting to a place where I don't know is a valid answer to certain things, and being alongside the person to find, maybe it's not finding the answer, but to find peace with not having an answer, or to find the answer maybe sometimes. And and deconstruction is a tough thing because there's such a cultural like stigma, or like it's a culturally charged word. It's a social media buzzword kind of thing. And the thing is, deconstruction is not like what you went through when you were having your crisis of faith. That is a form of deconstruction, but it's with a reconstruction at the heart of it to build back up on. It's not what we get into the issue with sort of the way it's used culturally is it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Is I want to poke holes in faith. I want to tear down and tear apart everything that I've been told. And sometimes maybe you do need to have a little bit of that, but it is more like peeling unhelpful things or unbiblical things back or away to get to a core of what does Scripture tell us about how the church should operate? What does Scripture tell us about what the faith, the daily faith looks like, and how do we pursue that biblically and well? And this whole like skepticism meets cynicism meets everybody's a hypocrite. Well, no surprise there. We are all gonna have these, but the where the church has muddied the waters throughout, like historically, where I think, and I mean like global church, like is not having this like vulnerable or repentant kind of mentality of like, we don't need to be there. We don't have to have answers to every single thing. We can walk through this together and really form like a true community of faith and not just this kind of authoritative figure or figures at the top kind of going, this is what you need to do. And please don't ask questions because we will not give you answers. And sometimes we may even ask you to leave if you have them and things like that. And it really, it needs to have that more familial aspect of, we're in this together, we're figuring this out and we're living the same life.
And I would say this, that's never been my experience. Like even growing up in what I would call like even traditional churches, it's never been like we don't ask those questions here. I think it was always more of the side of you could sense their discomfort because they knew they didn't have the answer, but I don't know that they were ever told like, it's okay to tell people I don't know. I think sometimes it's even peeling away. Like, sometimes it's not even directly related to church. Sometimes it's just my own struggles, right? Yeah. Like I've prayed this prayer. Like I've asked these things, like I'm praying for God to do this, heal my grandmother, whatever the case may be. And then when it doesn't happen, I think there's an element to our faith and our children's pastor preached this last Sunday, and it's been a statement that just has rung in my ears since I heard him preach it. He said, faith doesn't demand signs, it rests in God's promises.
Right.
Can my faith weather the storms of life? And the answer is yes, like emphatically, yes, it can. If you choose, like, I think there's an element there if we choose to keep the faith. Like it'd be real easy for any of us. God doesn't do everything I want him to do. He's not a magic genie that I rub the lamp and then he comes out and he says, Andy, I'm going to grant you 3 wishes.
As much as we would like that to be.
It to be sometimes. Sometimes he goes, Andy, you're dumb, dude. Like, I don't think he really, he may talk to me that way, but sometimes that's what I need. Like you're asking for something that ultimately is not going to be good for you.
Right.
Like I created you. I know you. This is not going to be good for you. It's then that I have to go, am I okay with that? Like, am I okay with, like, there's a lot of things my parents wanted from us as kids. Like, I grew up in a home that you had some chores, you did your laundry, you had this. Did I like it? Nope. As a 43-year-old man, am I glad that my parents instilled some of that in me? Yes. Yeah. Am I trying to do that with my kids? Yes. You know what I mean? Like, so there's some of this where we're not, I think with maturity comes some of these things where like, I didn't like what my parents did or, whatever. And I think the same can be said. It's an imperfect illustration, but I think the truth there is like God will prove himself faithful. He will every time. The question is, will we like we mentioned earlier, your ways are higher than our ways. God, you know things that I don't know. So this, you've either allowed this to happen or you created that, you made this to happen. Like there's a reason this is happening. Maybe it is simply because somebody else I made a bad decision. Now I'm suffering some consequences, or someone else made a bad decision and the ripple effects are now kind of swallowing me up. Whatever the case may be, can I still look at it and be like, God, you can still work good out of this?
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be watching. Maybe it's uncomfortable. Maybe I don't like it. Maybe it's not the way I would have done it or chose to do it. But I don't know that I've ever had a situation where that's happened in my life where I go back and go, there was some good that came out of this. Like, I'm not glad it happened by any stretch of the imagination. Like would I make the same decision over again? No way. But yet, can I see God's grace in it? Can I see his goodness? Can I see his presence when he's walking through this stuff with me? And sometimes I think when we get into this deconstruction, you know, and again, I'm not a theological, you know, it's not a topic that, you know, I've done intense research on in terms of, you know, from an academic perspective. But I do think sometimes having somebody in their life that they could have just gone and talked to that was like, okay, I hear you. And that may have been it.
Yeah.
But instead, and to be fair, you got to think about, guys, we're at a really weird time in culture where there has been like, you know, I grew up early ministry, the word was postmodernism, right? So you had modernism, right, where a lot of these guys grew up in, that very authoritative type. Yeah. Like there was some of that tendency in culture there. Then you get into postmodernism, where now we're living in something called metamodernism. I didn't even know that existed until this summer, right? I'm sure. Probably. But you know, where now it's all of a sudden like we have all this things are changing at such a rapid pace, right? And you have to stop and ask yourself sometimes as a pastor, be like, okay, I'm ministering to guys that are in this generation, in this generation, in this generation. And I'm a geriatric millennial. So I'm kind of on that upper age group of millennials where, you know, there's that, 5-7 year window where your parents are a little bit, you know, where their age kind of falls. Like you really kind of trend more toward the, Gen X, you know, your parents are more boomers than they were Gen X. But so naturally I'm not the typical millennial in a lot of ways, but yet you look at it and we've got boomers in our church. We have Gen Xers in our church. We have millennials in our church. We have Gen Xers or Gen Zers in our church. Yeah. And now we have, you know, any given Sunday at our church, maybe a third of our church are, you know, like middle school and down. Yeah. Right? So now I've got Gen Alpha that I'm dealing with. And all these different generations are asking different questions, and all 5 of these are engaging. Like your boomers, like we serve because that's just what we do. And then you get the Gen Zers and the Gen Alphas, like they want to belong, right? They want to be a part of something. Why are we doing this? What is this? And then there's some of the whys, right? Yeah. And so if you've been used to ministering, so I'm going to give grace to some of these guys because I don't know that there's been a time in history where there has been such a wide gap between what this generation's like and the one that we're trying to minister to or reach or whatever, you know, we're trying to do, whether we're trying to win them to the Lord or we're trying to just help them grow in their knowledge of the Lord, and we want them to have a faith that's their own and not an inherited one or whatever we want to call it. And now I'm like, okay, well, how do I preach to a age group all that might have, like I've got people regularly in church that are 80 some odd years old. And on the front row, I've got a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 16, or maybe a couple of 16-year-olds. Yeah. And I'm like, how do you paint with a broad enough brush? Yeah. But again, I think that's where this generational discipleship really comes into play, where you've got parents and grandparents. And I'm fortunate enough to be in a church where like we got multiple generations. Like we have 4 or 5 generations of one family that all attend on a Sunday morning. So, you know, you got grandma, you got mom and dad, and then you got these kids. And sometimes there's great grandkids that are all attending the same church. And I'm like, man, leverage this. Like we can have these conversations because used to, like, I don't know this world. When we would go spend time at grandparents' house, I know this world. But like, you know, there's a time when like, you know, when I got married, Dad partitioned off a part of the farm where I bought an adjacent farm. But on Sunday afternoon, where was I at? I went to church in the morning, and then we were at Mom and Dad's house. And then when I started having kids, you know, Eric, my son, he's on the front porch playing with his cars while me and Dad and Grandpa are all having conversations about life. And now it's like, you know, my dad lives in Arkansas and I'm here and I got my boy. But, you know, how often do we hear these guys talk about some of this stuff from a generational perspective? And so like, you know, I think men's groups are nice where if you can get a wide swath of age people in a men's group to be able to have those conversations, hear from, you know, different things. It also helps us to be in the room with other people to help us understand how they think. You know, we were talking about deconstructionism, you know, earlier, like sometimes we are the ones that need to be asking the questions. Man, I'm just 43 years old. Like, I ain't got all this stuff figured out yet. You know, I got a daughter that's about to be 14 and a son that's, 10. And I'm like, well, yeah, I could talk to you about like newborns, but you want to talk, I don't have much advice for you about
just now figuring this part out.
Like, I'm working through this like the rest of us. And I think some of that is, as we're talking about what we can do, and I think there's a lot of pastors really in this community that feel this way. I think we're very blessed in our community to have the churches we've got and the pastors we've got. And I think there's some really good people in this community. I think it's one of those things that I think you've got some guys that be like, you want to talk? Like, let's talk. Like, let's have a conversation and us ask questions. Like, I got 2 young guys that work for me, man. My brain does not work like theirs does. And so sometimes I'm like, what was really good about this sermon? What should I have, in your opinion, what should I have scrapped? Now, you got to take some of that, knowing what you got to kind of filter through some of this. But some of the best things I've done in the last year have come when I've sat down with a prepared sermon, slapped it down in front of a couple of 20-year-olds, one's almost 30, and said, all right, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden now I'm getting their perspective, but I'm also watching how it's impacting the different generations. Mm-hmm. So,
well, you're seeing and operating in a world where you're seeing this kind of generational faithfulness, this generational interaction, and embracing it. And I think culture outside of the church and probably inside the church too, to some degree, kind of does the opposite of that, where they kind of reject other generations and and I think that talking about deconstruction, like, that happens in isolation, the negative form of deconstruction, not the form that leads to reconstruction or the form that leads to like a stronger faith at the end of it, dealing with doubts, dealing with questions, things like that. But culturally, I mean, like in the West, in the last 20 years, like since the advent of social media, we've really been pushed toward this isolation, kind of like, I become my own authority. It's got to filter through my truth. It's got to filter through my perspective and my view.
It's an interesting book called Strange New World.
Yeah.
That deals with like, how did we get where we're at today?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating. And I'm not like a philosophical, I'm the farthest thing from philosophical, but I'm part of a book club of pastors. And there's like one, what I'm really, they're like, we're reading this book and I'm like, okay. And then I couldn't put it down.
Yeah. Then you get into it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the other cool thing that I don't know about other communities because I'm not in those, but within our community, talking about just our church, when you were talking about it, we do have the multiple generations, but even within our community, with our pastors, we also have the multiple generations going from, like you were saying, we have pastors who have been serving in a church for the last 50 years. And then we have, you're kind of in the middle of that. And then we have like Luke Winfrey, who, he just took over his church with what is this his first year or second year?
I think it's been 2 or 3 years.
2 or 3 now, but still, I mean, and I
think Southern Heights just hired a young guy too.
Yes.
I think. Yeah.
So being able to, like you were just saying, having a book club of pastors and stuff and being able to get the different perspectives of stuff there from multiple generations or wherever, or having, I know a couple of times we invited a lot of the youth pastors from other churches to come in and just sit down and
so that we wouldn't be operating in isolation, because that's the quickest way to it all falling apart. And that's the antithesis of what Christianity is about and what a church fellowship is supposed to be. And that's, to me, that's where deconstruction gets a bad rap, because you have these examples of people trying to do this stuff all on their own and trying to kind of find a reason and a way out, or they grew up maybe not in the opposite. Like, I grew up in a church tradition where if I asked questions, I was literally told, like, we don't ask questions. And so I always say, like, it's kind of crazy that I still believe it all, because I grew up in that. And at home, I could kind of ask questions, but my parents, my mom, who was the spiritual leader in our family, didn't, always have didn't feel equipped to be able to walk that stuff through me. So she would point me to my church, and my church wouldn't answer it. And so then I'm left to my own devices, and that is a dangerous path to be down. So it took until I was in my late 20s, early 30s to really capture my faith and let it be true, let it be real. And I think if I had been doing that process 10 years later, I think the wheels would have fallen off, and I would have been all down the rabbit holes of TikTok responses and answers.
So what kind of encouragement would you give somebody now going through the similar process that you went through, or somebody who's like, kind of what you said, why am I even still a part of this? What advice would you give them as far as stick with it, or,
Yeah, I would say lean into, find some sages, find some people that have been down that path before and are willing to talk. Don't take the first person who shuts you down or makes you feel like there's not an answer, or makes you feel like you're stupid for asking the questions. Don't take that as your final response and your final representation of all of Christianity. Lean in, open up the word, pray, and plead before God to help you have the discernment to find the answers or work through these things, and know that the Christian faith is about sanctification over a lifetime of faithfulness, not over, what can be answered in the next 10 minutes or I'm bailing, so just ask for faithfulness and ask for a little bit of clarity and discernment.
Yeah.
I don't know what you would say to that, but that's where my mind goes to.
Yeah. I like that you mentioned not letting that 10 minutes justify, because I think we kind of laughed about it when you said it, but that's what happens.
It does,
One person, one response, and you're like, oh, all right, that's it.
And then your whole, if you're in that, and we're speaking in stereotypes too. This is not every single person that goes through, but if you tend to think and operate that way, you spend a handful of minutes, maybe a few days, whatever, a short period of time you spend kind of wrestling through these things. You make a decision about what you believe or don't believe, and then you spend the rest of your life defending that moment. Whenever there's a lot more life to live, there's a lot more time to spend in the Word. There's a lot more sermons to hear. There's all kinds of influence and all kinds of answers or non-answers or whatever, however you do it. There's a lot more to it, and so don't let yourself get caught in that trap of thinking that your first response to something is the right answer or the right way to approach it.
I mean, a big reason that I wanted to do the podcast is simply because of that. I wanted different perspectives on leadership and health and wellness and business and religion and all of those things, because we get very tied up in just our one belief or our one thought and think that that's it. But if I went out and I was like, okay, I've been running for 24 years. I know everything.
Never going to grow.
Yeah. You're never going to grow. You're going to be
running the same way you were. Well, maybe not physically, but you're going to be running with the same mentality.
But I'm always interested in, I can always learn more and I can always get better.
And let's carry that analogy a step further, because I'm hearing what you guys are saying. And I think sometimes we want to microwave theology.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes what will happen is, so let's go back to how we met running the 5K. I didn't leave there mad because I couldn't keep up with Colin. How long you been running?
24 years.
Yeah.
Now.
You know how long I ran in preparation for a 5K? Nothing.
Yeah.
0.
I might have ran like a mile a week.
Yeah,
but the 5 weeks prior to be like, let's give this a shot. And I went into it going like, if I got to walk, I got to walk.
Yeah, but you do CrossFit, so you're capable of anything.
Except running long distances. I'm not a runner. This body's not built for running. But what I think where we're at is like, I think, you talked about this moment in time. You talked about the running thing. And I think sometimes like we want to make decisions in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm. Based on our preferences at that time.
And we can't, and a lot of times sometimes that's what it is. I think there's other times where like, you almost need to have like another episode of this, just unpack some of the stuff that we've talked about.
I figured after this episode, we'd be like, okay, when are we going to have Andy back? Because we're going to need to.
Only because like, I think we make some, I think you got the people that are super uncomfortable when they feel like they should have the answers and they don't.
Yes.
And they do not mean harm.
Right.
They don't. I think they are people who love us and care for us, but we're treading in some waters, sometimes generationally, that they didn't have to tread.
Yeah.
They aren't navigating some of the questions of identity, not in the way that we navigate. Like I read a book the other day and it's like, guys didn't worry about what their calling was. They got out of the military, they came home, they found a job and they worked that job until they retired. But now you have so many choices, right? And so now it's like, well, do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to be a nurse? Do I want to be a dental hygienist? Do I want to be a pastor? Do I want to be a teacher? Do I want to be a cop? What do I want to be? And there was all these multitude of things. And like, there are generations, like that wasn't how most, our grandparents grew up. Like, that's just not, they didn't face those kind of questions. It's like going to the cereal aisle at Walmart. Like, what kind of cereal do you want? I really don't know. Give me 6 choices and I'll pick one. But you put 400 in front of me, like, I'm going to sit there for a minute trying to figure it out. And I think sometimes some of these people genuinely have our best interest. Like, they love us, they care for us, but they didn't have to make some of the decisions or navigate some of the things that we have. And so I think grace is a huge, and I keep coming back to that word because I really think that's something that has been lost in culture today, is just us being able to go, you know what? I get it. Like I listen, I'm okay with you not having the answer. And sometimes we just need to hear that. Like, if you don't have the answer to this question, that's fine. Here's what I really need. I had a conversation with a young man the other day about expectations, and only because he thought something was going to be one thing and I kind of thought it was going to be something else. And I'm kind of navigating based on a moment that we had a conversation and it wasn't getting to where he wanted it to be. And I said, well, let's talk. And so I asked questions and he asked questions. And I feel like at the end of the conversation, like we were on the same page, but it wouldn't have happened without a conversation.
Right.
And so I think sometimes it's having those conversations, right? Allowing those things to kind of breathe, regardless of what it is. But I do think grace is a huge component of that, where like I can say in my life, there's been people who loved me dearly, cared a lot for me. And maybe in that moment, maybe their advice wasn't the best advice. And I have been guilty of this. Okay. Like in the moment, I'm saying like, this probably be what you need to consider doing. But either I didn't have all the information or I was just wrong. Like sometimes that happens. Like sometimes I'm just wrong, but it's not out of negativity. It's not out of a desire to impart harm on somebody. Yeah. You're just trying to do the best you can when sometimes maybe you just need to shut up.
Yeah.
But I think our skepticism has that little red flag raised that we don't give grace. It does,
and we don't.
Go, they must have that intention.
And let's be honest with you, there's so much that divides us, separates us. And we went through the whole cancel culture thing.
Right.
And
I was just getting ready
even
to say,
now, there's even now it's like, John, you and I aren't going to agree on 100% of stuff. Can we still be friends?
Yeah.
Colin, do you and I agree on 100% of stuff? No. Can we still be friends? Are there going to be some things that we're probably going to die on some hills that are going to be on polar opposets? I think there might be some. There might be some.
But we can
like
still
running is the best form of exercise. I'd arm wrestle you for that.
I wouldn't say it either.
But there would be one of those things where like, there'd be some hills we would want to die on.
Yeah. But that shouldn't.
But it shouldn't be something that keeps
forever.
No, it should not.
It
should not. And I think sometimes we live in that culture that there's almost that expectation. Well, if you're not for me,
you're against me.
Yeah, I've had that mentality.
And I think sometimes, and it's easy to fall into that. Like I'm not saying it's almost it's the flesh. There was something else that I was gonna just want to mention, and I know.
No, you're doing it.
I think there's something you had talked about separation in the context of like the deconstructionism. Let's not act like separation has not been here from the beginning.
Right.
What is, we talked about being under attack, there's a real enemy out there. And when you have an enemy, the enemy does not have your best interest at heart.
Right.
In fact, what he wants to do is you're like, and oftentimes this happens when we are injured, whether, we've gone through something like whether it's suffering or some sort of emotional thing that we go through. What's he try to do? In that moment, it's like a pack of animals, right? You ever watch a pack of wolves or a pride of lions, and I may get the vernacular all wrong on that, but what do they tend to do? They tend to cut one off, right? Yep. And then they separate it from the herd.
Right.
And sometimes we've got to fight that tendency to want to withdraw. Like, and I've been there. Like I could, men's night, Thursday night.
Yeah. You
led it. I shared a little bit about a season of life that I went through. So a couple other guys did too. You want to withdraw. And I don't know if it's because we just don't think anybody else is going to, I think there's a litany of reasons why we have a tendency to do that. I think a lot of them are false. It's just one way that the enemy, Satan, kind of puts a seed in our, a seed in, and it kind of begins to take
growing
root.
the thorn bush.
And it begins to choke out the things that we really should be trusting in, the things we really should be believing in. Because a lot of those things in the immediate, man, they're such felt. Like there's so much more emotion and feeling tied up with those things that are happening. It's like when I smash my thumb with a hammer, right? I'm not thinking about the rest of my body feels really good. I'm thinking about, man, I have just like, that thing's broke. Am I going to have to go to the ER? Why am I bleeding out of 6 different places? But that's all I think about. I think about that injury.
Yeah.
And I don't think about everything else. And I think sometimes that happens, and so there's that separation.
It's an opportunity.
And you really have to fight back. You really do have to fight back against that, because
that's why I like that you use the word grace so much. You were like, I know I mentioned it a lot, but it really comes into play here as a positive. We have to have, as the pack in this, have to have grace, but then the one that's kind of being led astray also kind of has to have grace.
Paul talks about that.
Yeah.
Like that's scriptural, right?
Well, and people are on so this faith journey that is a lifetime of being a follower of Christ. There are people at different spots in that sanctification journey. There's a book called Mansions of the Heart that's kind of based on this Teresa of Avila or whatever way back when. But it's like basically this idea that at different parts of our lives, we're closer and farther away from kind of the throne room, kind of closeness with Christ. And we can travel in these different levels based on circumstances, based on doubts, based on whatever's going on. And so we have to have grace, because we're constantly moving farther back and closer to, and other people are as well. But isolation, separation really throws a wrench in that, because if you're not, and I mean, I've been guilty of that. And especially lately, like even over the last few years, even, it's been really easy for me to just kind of want to keep, kind of Christian fellowship and brotherhood, and closeness like that, kind of a little bit at arm's length. And it's a really tricky thing, because Zach preached on this on Sunday. Satan attacked Jesus with temptation when he was in solitude, but not in isolation. He was away.
That was a good line in that sermon too.
Yeah. In a desert kind of time,
mind you, everybody, that is the Gen Z pastor that actually had that
Gen Zach
line. So,
but
Gen Zach,
but he was talking about it, and what that brought to mind was it didn't work because it wasn't isolation; it was solitude. We get isolated, and that's where Satan trips us up. That's where we get tempted and we fall for it. But when we're in solitude and we're spending time with, with God still, but it's coming from a place of strength, not a place of weakness. I think that's kind of just a little bit different kind of way to look at that. So I want to
take the solitude, and we'll go a different direction here, because we got to kind of start wrapping things up. But we are more of a health and wellness, so I want to talk about this side for you. When it comes to your pastor, it can be difficult. I think everybody knows at this point that there are going to be, it wears on you mentally, it wears on you emotionally, and even physically. Before we kind of started this, we were all talking about, the night before and stuff. And then the day of, when you're preaching, you have to be on that whole morning. You just kind of crash after that. So what are ways that you kind of get that solitude in a healthy way, not only physically, mentally, but also spiritually, outside of the church?
I think so. Like just personally,
yeah.
Like I'll be honest with you, my tendency is probably opposite. Like I'm a naturally introverted person. Like I can sit in my office in solitude and sometimes isolation, and be fine. Like sometimes for me, the thing is getting out. And so, I try to be around people. I don't always do a really good job of it on like there are times I just need to recharge the batteries. So for me, sometimes it's to recharge and take care of myself. Sometimes it's just like I'll spend a day or an afternoon or something. I'll go to the golf course and walk 9 holes. I do that on a lot of Fridays. Friday's my day off. physically, I've found that if I can get about an hour of exercise a day, and it varies, like some days I may get more, some days I may get less, but an hour is kind of my goal. I feel like emotionally, like I'm in a better place. I feel physically I'm in a better place. I do feel like, and I didn't always work out. Like when I graduated college, it's like, I'm never touching another weight again. Like I'm just not going to do it. And there was a situation where we lost a guy in our church, and I remember coming home, and I'd been with the family all week, and I remember coming home and my son had just been born. Like my wife was home on maternity and I was spending my days down at the hospital with this family. And I remember coming home one day and like literally just breaking, like I just cried. And I'm not really prone to crying, but I just remember sitting in the living room and just cried. And she's like, what is going on? And I was just, the weight of all the emotional side of things. And I remember saying to her, I was like, if I don't change something, I'm 5'11". I probably weighed 160, 170 pounds at the time. So it wasn't like I had any glaring health concerns. But I just knew that if I didn't change something, like some of the stress and the stuff that that just kind of come with the job sometimes and come with life in general, were going to catch up to me at some point. Yeah. And so I decided then I was going to get back into the gym. So I joined a gym here in town and just started going back and lifting some weights a little bit. And then one thing led to another, and I wound up over at the CrossFit gym here in town, and then wound up coaching and doing some of that. But even for me, if it's going and, Ashley and I walk, we try when our schedules allow, like we try to get out and walk a couple miles at night, which is really healthy for us, not just on a physical perspective, but I encourage couples, like if you go and walk the first half miles, like the niceties of the day. Hey, how was your day? It was good. How was yours? It was fine. Like what we would say, as you start getting into that, into that mile, like all of a sudden it's like, now you're really communicating. Like there's a difference between just talking.
Pace kind of steps up a little bit.
Whenever you get those situations where like, hey, you don't want to talk to me. Well, I asked you how your day was. Well, yeah, but what they're looking for is really something a little, like they want some depth. And so do something, like get out and walk. And what you'll find is that eventually not only will you'll start communicating and actually talking and even if it's just you listening, like you're being heard, your spouse is being heard. So, I mean, there's some of that. So like we'll walk. I do try. Sometimes the difficulty for pastors is like, there's a lot of times we read, and then everything we read, we try to turn into a sermon. You know what I mean? Like where it's like and you can probably where it's like you sit there and you're reading this like, ooh, I could really preach this. And sometimes it's like the prayer is just simply like, Lord, I'm gonna read your word. I just need to speak to me. Like that's what I need right now. Yeah. And so I'm actually signed up to do we got a little leadership thing that's getting ready to take place in our church. And like one of them I'm kind of excited about is this deal on like refreshing, like, how do you, because sometimes I think we need it. We realize we need it. Sometimes we don't really know how to go about it. And so one of the best advice like someone's gave me is like, it's okay to rest. And sometimes it's okay to shut your phone off. And so what I've done is like when my watch goes into fitness mode, the only people that can text me are my wife, my daughter, and my son. That's it. For an hour, I need to just, and that's the thing I like about the gym. I don't have to make a single decision. I'm not determining my workout. I get to show up, and for an hour, whether it's I'm going in an open gym or I'm going in or I'm going for a run, right? Yeah. I don't have to make any decisions. I'm gonna run till I'm tired and I'm gonna walk home. Like, Yeah. And so some of it is like, how do we navigate it? For some people, golf's not it, but if I lose a ball, who cares? I'm buying used balls anyway. And you know what I mean? Like, but I enjoy being outside, and it does. Like sometimes we've been going through a series at church where like, man, God's big enough to handle your emotions. Yeah. And so sometimes it's like, Lord, like maybe on that day, like I'm just overjoyed that like the weather has been gorgeous lately. So like sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes it's, so I like the physical side of things. I like solitude. I'm not always good at silence. Sometimes I feel like in my prayer life, I need to do a lot of talking. I don't. Sometimes I just need God to talk, I just need the Lord to talk to me. And so like, if there's one area I could improve in, would be like, could I set a timer and just for 10 minutes, not say anything? Like, could I just listen? Well,
One of the big things that I hear all the time whenever, I'll have someone come up and be like, oh, I really want to run, or I need to get in shape. I need to get healthy. I want to lose weight. I want to do this. Things like that is, I just don't know. One, I just don't really know where to start. And two, I don't know where I'm going to have the time to do it. So when you kind of, in your story, you were saying you kind of broke down, you're like, I got to change something. Was that process when you're like, I got to change it? What I usually recommend is, okay, let's look at your calendar. We got this, we got this, we got this right there. That's your spot. Well, that's only 15 minutes, but it's 15 minutes that you're doing something that you weren't doing before.
Yeah.
So kind of how is that process for you as you're trying to get back into the world of fitness? And
mine, honestly, like I fell back on what I knew. Which was going to a weight room, and lifting weights, like, because that's all, football, you play 2 days a week, you're still conditioning. Football season's over. Like you're squatting, you're cleaning, you're benching, you're moving. And so that's how I got back into it. But I found out real quickly, I get bored with that. And so like I got bored of Monday being leg day and Tuesday being chest day and Wednesday being back day. And
it's why I struggle so much with
and then I had a buddy and he did some programming for me. So it mixed it up. And so it was just enough, but then it was kind of like, well, it's still kind of the same thing I've been doing. So the gym I was at, they were offering a kettlebell class. And so it was like, come during lunch for 30 minutes. And so Ashley and I, that was something like we kind of thought, well, we'll go do that. And so we kind of did that a little bit. And then I had some people at church that were all involved. A couple of couples were doing CrossFit. And they're like, why don't you come over here and try this? And then all of a sudden what I found was, and you get into the whole CrossFit definition, but it's constantly varied, right? So you're mixing things up, but it also scratched a competitive itch that I hadn't found a way to scratch. Cause like I never got into softball. Like I wasn't a baseball kid. I go out there and make a fool of myself, and then I go home mad and be like, I don't know why we even show up to play because I
thought I was athletic, but
not so much.
And I had played some other things over the years, but this thing I was like, I enjoyed it. And even if it was just competing against me. Now Luke Winfrey does it. He and I have a very friendly back and forth, and so like it's just something that.
Large age gap there as well.
There's a large age gap. Yeah.
Okay,
like
large might have been.
No, it's like 15 years. Like that's older than I wanted.
That's also what I tell myself.
I still think I'm 28.
Yeah, that's what I try to tell myself when I see Luke. Every once in a while, he'll decide he wants to run that day.
And he'll just go
out and run 8 miles
at like
and
a 7-minute pace. Yeah. And I'm like, I hate you.
Yeah.
Like I just can't.
Well, imagine how I feel. 24 years of this, and I'm like, he's just decided to run today, and he's still a faster pace than I am.
We had a kid at the gym that on a whim decided to go run a marathon.
Yeah.
On a whim. No training.
Yeah.
Shows up. Doesn't have running shoes. Like he's wearing like shoes we'd wear to work, like lift weights.
Like the flat bottom.
Yeah. And he's like, I'm just going to go. And he does it. And I'm like, Coop.
Hey,
who are you? Like some of these guys are just phenomenal athletes.
Well,
like, let's just
and
be
that's
honest
the thing too. There's some genetics at play. There's a lot of mentality at play. I mean, some guys just have that ability, and girls have that ability to be like, "This is what I'm going to do," and they just do it.
I think going back to answer your question, that's where I started. I wound up doing the CrossFit thing, but that's been about 9 years ago, I guess, when all this really kind of 9-10 years somewhere in there of just this process. Now it's gotten to the point that like I can take a day off. Like today, I don't think I'm going to get anything in. I might get a walk in tonight with my wife after we get back from basketball practice. But there also comes a point that my body just has to do something. Like Andy, you've just sat too long, and you need to go, you need to go for a walk. You need to go for a run. You need to go do something. And so some of that is like, and for me, it's like, I'm going to allow myself the flexibility that I'm going to get that done. If my evenings are full, like I'll do it at lunch. If I'm not a morning person, like I'm just going to be like, I like getting up at 5:30 to go to the gym or something. Like it's just, I don't move. I don't function. I don't think.
I was just telling my son and his girlfriend that last time. I'm just like, I'm just not a morning person.
No.
You know, I have other runners and stuff that they're like, I wake up at 4 a.m. I go and I do 12 miles. I'm like, I'd feel sick all day if I like put my body into that. Yeah. That
well,
right
I'd be
away.
afraid like at noon, like all I want to do is come home and just crash. Like maybe try to take a 30-minute power nap and 6 hours later I'm waking up, you know, and didn't pick,
I tried to do that for a little bit, doing like a 5:30 workout and stuff. And I never got into the groove with it.
Just this school year, I mean, we're only in like week 3 or whatever of it. And I was like, I'm going to wake up early and try to it lasted like a week. I'm like, I'm switching it to the evenings again.
I love the idea.
Because,
I love the idea of it. I do. Like, I wish, and maybe some of it's just discipline. I think that's probably a big part of it in my own life. Like, I'm not going to talk about anybody else. I think for me, I have a lot of respect for the guys, like have the discipline to get up at 5:30. And then, you know, you have your evenings, like where you're not away from your family for another hour or something, whatever the case may be. So I've just allowed myself the flexibility. Like, when can I get this in? And sometimes it may only be half the workout. Like maybe I don't get the full hour that I want. Maybe I only get like 15 or 20 minutes, but I've still done something.
You've still done
and
something.
And that's
more
kind
than what
of
you would
where
have done if you
I'm at is like, can I keep this body moving? And I keep telling, my wife and I have this conversation all the time. Like, when our kids are gone, like we want to be able to do things we enjoy doing. I hope I have grandkids one day. I want to be able to do things. I remember going to walk in the woods with my grandpa during deer season. Like my grandpa was walking around and I'm like, I want to be able to go. I want to be able to play basketball with my son until he's a senior in high school.
Yep.
And
just had this conversation last night.
And so like, I know that if I want to do those things, like those things don't just happen. Right. I think there's a lot of back and forth even between like sports and Christianity. And so I know when he's 18, if I still want to be able to beat my son in basketball, because I'm not going to let him just win.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to have to put some work in because I can't be going out there on janky knees. Yeah. When he crosses me up and I've blown an ACL and I'm laying in this, you go get your phone, call your mom. Like, let's get me out of here.
After he makes fun of you for a little bit.
After he makes fun of me because I know he would trash talk me, and laugh at me. And then find out if I, and he's a sweet kid. Like he would be like, Dad, you okay? Yeah. Oh, Dad, I crossed you up. Yeah. But I do, for me, it's a lot of it's just like, and I think for me too, like, I think there's a spiritual component to it. Like, body's a temple and like, we want to take good care of it. And I like to eat. I'm not a dieter.
I just kind of called you out on your Taco Bell passion last night.
At least it's not a Wendy's biggie bag. I'm kidding. If you're a Wendy's fan, like,
that's John and I. That's our lunch place.
And here's my deal. Like Taco Bell is almost like a guilty pleasure. Like if Ashley's like, hey, I got the kids fed, just grab something on the way home. 9 times out of 10, I'm going to Taco Bell, and I don't know what it is about it. I know it's not good for me, but I don't do it very often.
Grow up. And
sometimes we don't. Or a pizza. Like I can sit down and eat an entire pizza by myself. Yeah. I shouldn't, but sometimes I do. But some of it, is just like I like to eat, and I know if I like to do that, then
you gotta.
That kind of led into kind of my final, and I'm kind of calling out all Christians on this one as well. Do you feel that exercise is a form of worship, or can be a form of worship?
It can be. I don't think it is for all people. And here's what I mean by that. My wife loves to garden. I don't. And for her, like she'll tell you, like she enjoys going out and, cleaning up the garden. She enjoys going out and picking fruit off there and going in and cutting it up for us to have with supper. That's not me. But I do enjoy mowing grass. My wife doesn't enjoy mowing grass. It's not something, maybe, at least this is hypothetically.
Yeah.
And so I do think for some people, absolutely, like it's a form of worship. Now I do think for me to sit here and say it is, the social worship, or have some other implication that if you're not doing it, you're not worshiping. But I do I think there are people who, we talk about, Zach, our children's pastor, he'll say, like, when I go for a long run, he says, I'm spending a lot of time with the Lord. And he doesn't go with headphones. Like, he's not like he's listening to a podcast. Or now when I walk, I like to have I'll find some podcast or sermon to listen to. Like there's a couple guys I really like to hear preach. And so sometimes I'll just pop those in and I'll just listen to it, or I'll get caught up on a podcast where like it gets given me food for thought. So I'm thinking through. Now we were talking earlier about our brains. Like they'll say something and then I'll be thinking about it for 10 minutes and not catch anything they've said in the last 10 minutes. So then it's like, I got to go back and find the spot that he said it. But I think it can be, I think most certainly. And sometimes for some of us, it might be, provided it was running or just walking. I think sometimes it might be just something. If you're struggling to find time to be silent with the Lord and just listen.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a great way. So Sunday we were out of town. We were spending some time with family, and I just popped in my headphones. I clicked on the church's YouTube page and I listened to Zach and walked a 5K. Yeah. And the whole time, like I'm just sitting there. Now my wife on the other hand, sitting at the table with her notepad, and she's, writing stuff out. And she's like, "Oh, did you?" And she's reading it to me about what Zach said. And I'm like, "Yeah, I heard that." And
I heard this part, but then I
But then I was thinking about how faith doesn't ask for signs. And I was like, then it just kind of got me off on this whole thing. But I do think sometimes, I think it's a vehicle through which sometimes. But I would say just like gardening is for some, or running, or some form of, I think there's a lot of different things. Golf is not a good place for me to worship the Lord. I'll just say that. As much as I love doing it, and as much as I have conversations.
Yeah, you just recently preached on anger as one of those temptations. Overcoming anger.
Yes.
That might play a little more in at least for me, that's where anger usually starts to come out on the golf course. So I'm a big believer in the mind, body, soul kind of holistic aspect of, to me, that's like, there are these different areas where discipleship is taking place. And I think doing something physical, and that doesn't necessarily mean like some extremely difficult workout or something, but like gardening or something to where you're kind of pointing your energy physically, and able to ponder on spiritual things, spend time with the Lord in prayer, whatever it might be, listen to a sermon, just be silent, whatever that might be. These things play into each other in a really interesting way. And it's not every kind of quote unquote spiritual discipline is about actively doing something spiritual that looks spiritual on paper, but things that allow your mind and your spirit to connect in a different way. And that's what I found. Yeah. Cause and I'm not a competitive person. I was never involved in sports. I've never really cared that much about fitness or anything like that until a few years ago. And that was such an eye opener to me. It was like, oh, this is all connected. This is all a part of how we've been designed by God to function and flourish in these ways. And I've been neglecting a huge part of it by not doing that.
I think there's certainly components of it that we do neglect. Like sometimes it may be, and I would even argue like the intellectual component, the emotional component, the physical component. But the way I would differ from that is I think you have the spiritual, right? That's all encompassing. Like you don't separate the spiritual from the intellectual or the emotional or the physical, right? It's almost like we can't silo life. Like you think of these farm silos, like this is the grain, the corn silo, this is the bean silo, this is the other bean silo. Like these don't mix, but you've got this big picture of our lives, and like spiritually, whether we want to admit it or not, like it's a component of it, but I don't separate out. Like when I'm at the gym, it's not like I'm no longer spiritual. Yeah. When I'm maybe reading a book on culture or I'm not separating it from the spiritual. Intellectually, if I'm or emotionally, if I'm, like I'm not separating that. Like it's all this one thing. Like now it's like, okay, now how do I approach this from a Christ-like perspective? Like, and even taking like passages and being like, okay, this is what this is saying. Like, how does this line up with God's word? And I think God talks about, rest. Why does he talk about rest? Well, because we need that time to just breathe deeply. And maybe it is for the mental reset or the emotional reset, or maybe the physical, like whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Like there's a rest, right? And so we need to rest. But yeah, I think the idea is not separating especially for the believer, like not separating those things out where like these are siloed off over here. And then I'm going to put my Jesus hat back on.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And now I'm going to start, here. And I think that's true. Like work, play, even some of these other areas of life where we're siloing. Well, Sunday morning, let me put that hat back on and then show up at church. And then I'm going to do this. And then become Monday when it's back to work, I'm going to take that hat back off. And so you got that hat on all the time.
Yeah.
That's why I say like workout can be worship, but I think sometimes sitting in solitude can be worship. Yeah. Me singing in my car.
Yeah.
Me opening my Bible to read is worship. Me putting my offering, I do text to give, but me doing that worship, so there's all these
your kids to practice.
Taking my kids, can I redeem that time? How can I as a parent go, I've got this 10 minutes in the car, instead of listening to ESPN radio, what if I just ask my son, some questions, and we do some disciple anyway. That's a whole nother.
Yeah, no, I really like that you mentioned that, because a lot of times as trainers, when me in particular, whenever I'm putting out there hey, I'm going to do this running program, or I'm going to do this, and we're going to really focus on the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, I am kind of breaking it up. And so I like what you're saying, where it's you need to have those things, but it all needs to be encompassed underneath that spiritual, and you can have that with everything. So I really like that.
And I think it keeps it all in perspective too, because I tend to have somewhat of an addictive personality. Mm-hmm. And so it's real easy for me to make idols out of things that don't need to be idols.
Yeah.
Right. And then they begin steering my time. There was a season in my life where I was going to work out. I was going.
Yeah. No matter what.
No matter what. I would work everything around my schedule to make sure I was going to be there. And it was not healthy. It wasn't healthy. Sure, an argument can be made, well, Andy, you're working out every day. Yeah, but wasn't emotionally healthy. Right. Wasn't spiritually healthy. Wasn't
wasn't good for a family or relationship.
And and that's a hard thing sometimes, even in life, is my wife was the one that called me out on it. She said, "Hey, this is what's going on," and I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah.
And I didn't like hearing it. No one likes hearing accountability.
Right.
But she was right. Mm-hmm. I wanted to be mad at first, you know what I mean? And that's the thing, I was but you listen and you hear them out, and you're like, yep, she's right. And, you make those changes, and I'm better for it. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to have to end it there, because you have to get to your other thing that you do for our community, which is drive a bus.
Drive a school bus.
So we're getting to about that time, so you need to go hop on the school bus. But I think it's pretty evident that we'll probably need to have you on again at some point. I think there is some things we'd want to talk about even more. Or maybe eventually I could talk you into maybe doing your own podcast or something like that at some point. So.
I don't think I'm that interesting.
It's either that or a marathon.
Yeah, either that or a marathon.
Oh, gosh. Both would be it'd be painful for people both ways watching either one of those things happen.
But I really appreciate you taking the time today to come in and talk to us.
I appreciate it.
3 years of going to your church, being friends with you guys. You guys have become a big part of our family, not just at church, but in life, really, because our kids do so many cross country and basketball, and
we're into each other often.
Yeah. So it's great. So I'm really appreciate you coming on, and thank you.
Yep. Appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Ditto.